Hello, everyone. This is What I've Been Thinking. I'm your host, Marcus Cage, and we have a special guest with us joining. He goes by the name of Anti-Fascist Awkward. Mr. Awkward himself is going to be explaining a lot of the minutia about the defund the police movement, and like some of the things, so we can kind of get a real understanding of what we're talking about when we say defund the police. There's a lot of different ways which I feel the narrative has been framed from the right wing and more corporate media. And I think that it's better that we actually talk to people who are more immersed into this movement, and actually talk to actual activists, talk to people who actually are on the ground and are trying to think about these things on a regular. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Mr. Awkward and let him, fill you guys out on defund the police and what it's actually about. Thank you for joining me, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I don't think I've been called Mr. Ever. I've been called a lot of worse things, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, defund is, controversial still, but it has never been more commonplace as something that people are suggesting. It's never been more popular of a concept. For me, defunding is only step one. And defunding could mean simply reducing the amount of money that is invested in police departments. So when you talk about it that way, it's actually, I mean, maybe for some, but to me, that's anything but radical. Right now, cops get the vast majority of budgets in many cities and towns across this country. In addition to the taxpayer money, the politicians are typically also investing in, are also in bed with corporations that are profiting off of prison labor, are also donating to to police foundations. So cops through other means are also getting a lot of money. And then we're seeing increasing militarization of police departments, even in small towns with tanks and rocket launchers, military grade weaponry that's completely unnecessary 99% of the time. And that's done through a variety of grants and programs where things are handed down to police departments from the Pentagon, the Justice Department, the FBI. So for those who say they're tough on crime, obviously they're never going to think that we should put any less money into police departments. We'll get into the fact that major investment in police and prisons doesn't actually deter crime or keep anyone safer. But let's say you do believe that that's the case. Obviously, you might think it's radical to defund. And take New York City, for example, where there was a mass movement recently to defund the NYPD by $1 billion. That may seem like a lot, and to some, they were successful. Only when you look at the fine print and you see what was actually done, defunding didn't even happen. What they did was there are what they call safety officers. I put that in quotes because these are militarized cops who are stationed at militarized schools throughout New York City. And instead of actually investing $1 billion less in the police, they just shifted safety officers over to the school budget. So that $1 billion was simply moved over, and it's still invested in policing.
Well, yeah, I mean, sorry to interrupt real quick, but that's something that I wanted to bring up, especially one of the stories I recently saw. It talked about a massive amount of money that's going to be shifted into a lot of the police stations due to be like somewhere, I believe, in January and February. A lot of these things are supposed to go through. And it's not going to matter whether it's Trump who's the president or if it's Biden. This is something that's already been done, and it's going to be passed out through the different federal agencies. And then I reflect on the fact of I don't feel a lot of people understand how much of the budget actually goes to policing. a lot of it goes to police force. I mean, I saw some studies that said anywhere from 50% to up to 60% of the budget is actually going to police force.
Right.
And like when I did my original defund video, I was more worried about people misunderstanding what we meant by defund, as in a reduction and a reallocation these funds into proper means. And I feel like now that whole kind of worrying about the name part, I feel a lot of people have gotten past that. And so I don't feel that the name is an issue or a barrier anymore. But I do wonder if we're not getting the message across to like how extraneous and how large these budgets actually are that we're talking about defunding.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, like if you take New York City, for example, in the most recent budget that a so-called progressive mayor proposed, he was reducing the school budget again while increasing the already bloated police budget. And, and you're right in the sense that today more people understand what defund means. But I do want to clarify about a couple things. One, you still do have, like you said, it doesn't matter if it's Biden or Trump. Biden has made very clear that he's against defunding.
True.
And, to me, defunding isn't even enough. So, like you kind of hinted at, you can't just defund police and invest that money into other forms of carceral punishment. You have to reallocate those, massive, I mean, we're talking trillions of dollars into programs that would make cops in cages not necessary. So that includes healthcare, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, jobs training, skills-based education, violence prevention, intervention, wellness checks and peacekeepers, mutual aid, and reparative justice. This is how we create a society where they're not even necessary. But like I said, for me as an abolitionist, defunding is far from revolutionary. I don't believe that police are necessary at all. And as one of the co-creators of the 10 Demands for Justice, our first step, as I said, is defunding the police and reallocating those resources, starting with the most impacted communities. These 10 demands are also kind of laying the groundwork for abolition. So this is not a pie in the sky concept. This is realistic in that it is not suggesting that we immediately empty the prisons of all people who are incarcerated. We don't tomorrow fire every police officer. But as soon as we start defunding, as soon as we see in real time, in stark numbers how crime actually decreases, not increases, it will become more and more clear how this is the path that we should be taking. And as we're defunding and reallocating those assets, we'll be building this society to the point where when we are at the point where we've defunded down to zero, where cop salaries are zero, where police department investment is zero, where all nonviolent offenders have already been released from prison, we'll be at the point now where the alternatives to prison, the alternatives to police officers are in place, and abolition even will not be so radical either. But I do want to say that for those who are tough on crime, the police today actually only solve 2% of crimes. 2%. Okay. Research also tells us that interactions with police predict future criminality.
Yeah.
Research tells us that being put into prison increases your criminality. It makes you a better criminal. It is shown that prison is not for penitence. Prison is not for rehabilitation. They are not educated. They come out, and the vast majority who are people of color or who are poor and therefore don't have access to, the types of jobs and things that will enable them to move forward, get sent right back to prison.
Exactly.
Then there's the profit motive, the fact that it's not just private prisons, but all prisons, state, federal, local jails, through cash bail. It is poor people and people of color who are criminalized. It's poverty and race. So there are certain classes of people, certain colors of people who are targeted by the police and put into prison. And this has been the case since slavery ended. With the slave codes, they needed
something that I definitely want to jump in real quick and say,
yeah.
which something I don't think a lot of people focus on is, yes, it is a class thing where it's attacked across the lower class and then the lower middle class. But if you are a person of a minority group, whether you're Black, Latino, whether it's LGBTQ, whether you have autism, whatever it is, where you fit into a subgroup, a minority, it seems like your odds of being picked on are worse. Be a white guy who lives in a predominantly Black neighborhood. I've seen where you always picked out by the cops also, because you stick out more and they just seem, oh well, this criminal element. So I want people to kind of be aware of those things. Yes, we have people of different, groups who are minority groups who, okay, they move into higher social economic groups and they may not face as much of those things, but of the people in their peer group, when compared to, say, non-minority people or more people who would fall under the more white patriarchy system, because sometimes a lot of white women get thrown into it also. And I'm not saying that all white men are the cause and that some are not the victims also. But what I'm saying is when you get into those different groups, you're still isolated, I feel, and you're still a possible victim to falling up under this criminal justice system and being right in the mix of somebody who's class-wise would, on a monetary means be lower than you.
Yeah. I mean, yes, it is without a doubt criminalization of poverty. The types of crimes that are sending people to prison are not violent crimes. People are sent to prison for being too poor to have a home. People are sent to prison for petty theft to feed their families. With mandatory minimums, with 3 strikes laws. There was a guy in prison for decades for stealing a piece of pizza. And then on the other, but then in addition to that, race does play a huge part. If you look at the percentages of people of color who were stopped and frisked in New York, it was, 90% or something people of color. And then, in this country, 1 in 3 Black boys are going to end up in prison. 1 in 6 Latino boys are going to end up in prison. That's not the case for white men. So these are the kinds of things where when you look at who is being arrested, what they're being arrested for, and what their arrests mean, not for just, every white guy on the street. It's not about just random people. It's about this system that is actually achieving, it's not broken, it's achieving exactly what it was intended for. As soon as slavery ended, they needed a way to have cheap labor, and that's what they're getting in prisons across this country. Inmates or incarcerated people work for 0 cents to at most $1. Meanwhile, $15 a minute to make a phone call. So corporations are profiting in so many different ways. So that's why, 10 for Justice is, this kind of really expansive set of demands that ends with, ending carceral punishment completely. Hold
on, can I hold you one thing? I want you to fill this out a little bit more for the audience, because I feel this is where it leaves the most opportunity for a lot of critiques from the right and from some of the more moderates. Because I feel like I understand what you're saying here, and I feel like I agree and understand with most of the abolitionists on this subject. But I feel that it's not explained out enough that you do believe in a process on working down, the prison population and working on, okay, this should not be a crime where you should be incarcerated. This should be
Right.
treatment. This should be counseling, and that it is steps that abolitionists are looking at. That it's not just we want to defund, abolish, and then the next day on to everybody's out of jail. There are actual steps, and I feel like sometimes I don't feel that it's explained out and showcased enough.
So,
and I was wondering, can you just elaborate a little bit more on that with people so they can get that? Yes, you are talking about steps. It's not just snap your fingers and
I mean, I can speak only about what we at 10 Demands have put together. Abolitionists predominantly have been led by Black feminist women who are more directly impacted by this in their everyday lives than I am, and have studied this for longer than I have. I've been doing this for about 20 years, and I've been a social justice activist for, and criminal justice activist for even longer. But as a working class Jewish guy, like my understanding and my connection can only go so far, right? But of course, I worked. 10 Demands is a multi-ethnic, multiracial, multicultural group, and so we made sure that all people were represented. Not just Black people, but also the First Nations, Indigenous people, Brown people, But so having said all of that, I do think that there are some abolitionists who, are not really interested in providing that color that you're looking for. I do believe that abolition, excuse me, abolition is abolition is abolition, and that's something that we all say. Meaning, Derek Chauvin, who killed George Floyd, I would also not put him in prison, because you can't have it both ways. If you believe in carceral punishment, you do, or if you don't, you don't. But we at 10 Demands do recognize that we today, as a society, are not in a place where we could just change the way we handle crime and criminality and free everyone and stop policing. Like, it can't happen overnight, because
that's why I wanted you to explain that, because I know that there's a difference between how some of the abolitionists feel about it. I lean more towards, I've read about the 10, and I lean more towards your perspective that in this society, the way things have been formed, it's going to take a lot of heavy lifting as far as getting things to a point to get to that. But that's what our goal is.
Yes.
And that's more the camp where I feel I am. I'm not going to say that I'm an abolitionist myself, but I say that I'm sympathetic, definitely, to the cause. And like, for instance, yes, a lot of mental health treatment and counseling will do wonders, but that's not something that's overnight. That's not something that's quick. That's going to take time. And when you have people who have so much damage that's been done to them through this society, through capitalism, through abuse of family members or people around them, when you have all those things, it's a lot of sores to kind of deal with and to try to heal. And I feel like it's going to take some, like, for instance, our generation, our people in this era decide this is something we have to make a change on. So it starts with this change in mentality first.
Yes.
And then we can start getting to that. And then as we start to heal some of these wounds, then we can start getting closer to, what we're looking to as our overall goal. Because I believe that some people are looking at this, the whole abolishing prisons as in like, oh, this is something we're looking for as part of the Democratic platform to abolish them by 4 years or something, kind of nonsensical. And I just want to bring people back to, no, these are serious people. They spend time really thinking about this issue. It's not just, okay, one and done. And I also wanted to thank you also, being a white male, white Jewish male who was speaking out, because this is something where this is an argument in the Black community. Definitely, I feel that we couldn't get progress in the civil rights struggle without other races being involved. Because if you are the minority, you need a portion of the majority to bond with you and say enough's enough here. And it, not that I'm saying that a minority can't gain their own independence, but you're fighting a much tougher battle. And what I've seen through history, it's always taking collaborations with factions of different people, maybe different cultural groups or whatever. When you look at other problems, on a national level, it took, okay, well, this country gets with that country to help with this country to fight against whatever cause, terrorism, um, genocide, all those horrible things. Sometimes it takes a whole group, and one person, it's as strong as they're against it, it's not enough. And that's what I mean. My argument, which I say a lot to most minority communities, where I'm talking about Black, Latino, Muslims, whichever I'm talking about, I believe that you need a little bit of solidarity from, the other groups, or you're always going to be alienated.
Yeah, but I also think it's, and I mean, I like that. It's nice to hear someone say that, right? But as nice as it is to hear someone say that, I personally believe that you don't need me. And I think, one of the most dangerous things.
Well, I'm sorry, I'll let you finish and then I'll respond.
One of the most dangerous things is when a white man takes control over the message, or even worse, dominates the strategy. So I do think it's worth noting that while I am the most vocal and visual representative of 10 Demands, that's because I'm a public figure, I'm a hip hop artist, and I've been doing interviews and in this justice movement for so long that it made sense. But if you were to have been a fly on the wall and seen our organizing meetings and everything, I take a back seat a lot of the time, because personal experience.
That's the dirty secret most people don't know. And right. I'm just going to lay this out, and we'll be, because I like to be straight up and direct with people, and my audience included. I'm sorry that there are certain people who have certain powers, and you have the 1% who, some of these people have a white supremacist mentality, and right. They're going to control things, and people tend to dismiss things from their side. I feel more. If another white man starts saying some white stuff, sometimes the white guys more tend to just let that slide because it's another white man. And what like, for instance, with Trump, I can't remember which rapper, but he came out with a song. I'll just say it, "Fuck Trump," and that sentiment was out there, and it had been out there, but nobody listened to it until Eminem said it. And it's not that I think that we need Eminem. It's not that I think that we need him to speak for us. Mm-hmm. It's that sometimes it takes to see somebody turn. Yeah, thank you, YG. Sometimes it takes for somebody on the other side of the issue to say, no, I'm not with them on this.
Right.
And then when you see that, like almost with this Black Lives Matter protesting, you know how long I've been protesting against police brutality and all that? I mean, I've had all kinds of things happen to me. And I have no criminal record. I'm a veteran of the U.S. military. No kids running around, none of that stuff. But yet, I still get treated as if, I'm against a disciple or folks or Crips or whatever. And I tell people that I've been fighting and screaming and hollering and Black Lives Matter, and all of a sudden, I mean, almost when the whole George Floyd thing, and everybody switched all of a sudden, it mm-hmm. was almost scary for me because it's like, everybody for the past 20 plus years has been telling me that I'm insane. You're over exaggerating. Oh no, it's because you guys just don't listen to the cops the right way, and all this stuff. And in all honesty, what it is cops have this mentality, and I hope that there's a cop out there listening to this. They have this mentality because that since they're an officer, they have complete authority to treat you and talk to you any kind of way. And my thing is, you do not.
Right.
As an American, we have a First Amendment. I can say whatever I want to. If I want to tell the cop he's a stupid piece of shit, he can fuck off. It is my right. I do not have to show them respect. I do not. But what they don't understand is part of their job is to show me respect, even when I'm being disrespectful. And I've been through a lot of their training in the military, doing police training. You're trained. You're supposed to de-escalate. Also, yeah. I was a sheriff deputy when I worked corrections. You were trained to de-escalate. But what it is they walk around with this little man power trip attitude, or a lot of them just outright, stereotype. Well, I see this guy, bald, white guy, big guy with tattoos and piercings. I think he's a biker, so I'm going to go attack him. And that's like where my big push has been, looking at that next level, because even if we're able to defund, we still have the problem of 99% of cops still get away with it. Even when you have camera, you have witnesses, you have all that, they still keep getting away. And I feel like the DA level and a lot of those people in the local state houses, we have to still keep our eyes on them also. I'm saying defund, yes, but the next phase needs to be focusing on that accountability level at the top.
Exactly. So, I mean, that's the reason that defunding is not enough. 1/3 of stranger murders committed in this country are committed by cops. Cops, just those who admit it, 40% of them beat their spouses. Cops are the most violent people in this country. Yep. And so, and you're absolutely right that it extends beyond the cops who are not, who have no idea how to de-escalate and make no effort to de-escalate. It does extend to the courts. It extends to the prosecutors and to the judges. It extends to the prisons and the jails. And, that is exactly why, as part of 10 demands, we start with defunding and reallocating, including demilitarization. But the next steps are, as we're defunding and demilitarizing, we have to immediately take steps to eliminate discriminatory policing, prosecution, and sentencing. Things like broken windows policing, stop and frisk, racial profiling, repeat offender policing, decriminalizing poverty, and the occupation of public space. Then it's instituting complete law enforcement transparency and accountability, and independently investigating all police crimes and abuses of power. We, as the public who are paying their salaries, should have access to all of this information. It shouldn't be the same justice system that we already know is corrupt, and the civil courts that are, also lean heavily toward protecting the police with the power of police unions and police foundations. They should not be the ones investigating it. There should be a national database, local, local groups, independently elected, panels that are investigating them, and cops that are found guilty should be fired immediately. The departments that are found to be harboring these criminals, involved in collusion and conspiracy, those are the first ones that should be abolished. And meanwhile, all the victims should be getting reparations, and these reparations should not be coming from where they come from now, more tax dollars. It should be coming. It should be coming from the cops' pensions and personal liability insurance.
Well, hold on. Hold on. You got to stop and go back on that one, because I feel like people have missed that. If we don't dive in a little bit deeper on that, can you explain to the people, where does the funding, when cops are sued for, police brutality, for accidental homicide, for all of these things, where does the actual money come from when it's paid out?
We pay for it. The same people that are being beaten, arrested for minor offenses, you know, incarcerated, the same communities that are being destroyed by the cops are the ones paying the very, very few who happen to win those civil cases. So while we as community members certainly want to help them, we shouldn't be the ones paying out of our pockets.
Exactly.
You know, it should be the police officers themselves. And, you know, and it's so rare that they're even held responsible because they're policing themselves. So why would they hold each other accountable? You
Like
know,
last week. Oh, sorry. Last week I brought up how because I was looking into the numbers and it said like 99% of cops are not even charged, and then it broke down to out of that 99%, like 45% are actually convicted, and then out of that 45%, it was something like they're sentencing total to like less than 6 years for like 80% of them. It was like ridiculous. So it's like even if they do get a conviction, the sentencing you can expect is going to be so minuscule. I mean, go back to the whole Botham Jean thing, and that officer. I mean, what did she get? Like 5 years, 6 years, something like that. And then you know what's going to happen? Good behavior. She's out in a year and a half.
Right. Meanwhile, there are innocent people who've been in prison for decades who've actually been found innocent and are still sitting there. There are people, you know, like Mohawk in Chicago who've posted bail, even though we shouldn't have cash bail to begin with because it targets poor people, and still don't get released. You know, and like if you look, for example, at Eric Garner, for example, Daniel Pantaleo, you know, Ramsey Orta was already carrying a phone on him with his hand on the record button everywhere he and Eric went because of how frequently they were stopped and frisked. That's the reason he was able to record that video. It took 5 years for Daniel to even be fired. He was never charged with anything, but to even be fired. And that was after the Justice League made their way into a national Democratic primary debate and protested on live national television, interrupting Cory Booker's speech. That was the only time the mayor, who was then running for president, decided to actually make sure that this guy was fired, who had I don't know, maybe a dozen prior offenses, similar violent offenses before he killed Eric Garner,
including two of them where he discharged his firearm.
Right. And then what happened to Ramsey was they tried to kill him. They framed him. They got him locked up. So, you know, it's an entirely corrupt system that, you know, a lot of people say is broken, but I say is working perfectly.
Oh, it's working perfectly. I mean, if you look at just the difference in some of the crime statistics, how they changed over the decades, 85% of the people who are incarcerated to this day are nonviolent offenders.
Right.
So most of that is locking up users for the most part. I mean,
and that's why decriminalizing drug use is also part of the 10 demands. You know, Angela Davis said that, you know, the category lawbreakers is far greater than the category of individuals who are deemed criminals, you know, since all of us have broken the law at one time or another. So if we're willing to take seriously the consequences of a racist and class biased justice system, we'll reach the conclusion that enormous numbers of people are in prison, not so much because of the crimes they may have indeed committed, but largely because their communities have been criminalized. So, you know, it's really easy for someone who doesn't have to fear repercussion for their behavior to say, like, cops, you know, are really important. They're getting the criminals out. No, I mean, if you look at,
the music to my ears, you like nailed. You said so much right there on that little bit, and covering multiple things, because you said like it's almost like there's no accountability. They get to do whatever. If you make a mistake, you don't have to worry about anything.
Right.
And I look at it as it's the same thing. I guess accountability should be, I guess, the tone for 2021, because that's what's going on with this whole defund movement. That's what's going on with this whole Democratic primary. We're not even going to talk about that hot mess. And then that's what we have, which goes on with Wall Street also.
Yeah.
I mean, they're allowed to believe that, hey, I can just do whatever with somebody else's money. Then of course it's fine. If I'm allowed to kneel on Awkward's neck and, oh well, if he dies, hey, it happens. Stuff happens.
Yep.
If that's always going to be the standard, that hey, this is just okay because I made a mistake. And I didn't want to read too many comments, but they said, was it Pete Buttigieg? Which, yes, it was Pete Buttigieg you were talking about, right?
I'm sorry. What was the question?
About the person who was running for president.
No, it was.
No, Amy Klobuchar, right?
No, de Blasio is the mayor of New York City who is being protested against, but it was Cory Booker, who's from New Jersey, whose speech got interrupted.
Oh, that's right, Cory. Because I'm like, in all honesty, you could say de Blasio because the issues which are going on there. You could say, I know that Mayor Pete, the stuff that he had going on in Indiana was a hot mess, and it has to do with the whole policing issue. And then you can go on to Amy Klobuchar and her issues, and her being from Minnesota right there with George Floyd, and then her and her history with George Chauvin. So, I mean, honestly, it's easier to pick which one of the candidates don't have an issue with policing.
None of them. So, yeah, like that's a conversation for a whole nother time. The Democratic convention is a, like I said, it's a conversation for a whole nother time.
Well, which I want to have you back for part of that conversation, because I definitely want to talk about it, and I definitely want to have your input on a lot of that.
There is no candidate, there is no leader today who is a corporate centrist Democrat or racist Republican who is on the right side of the conversation we're having today. There are progressives.
A perfect example. I was going to say, while we're talking about that, why don't you just relay that onto our new, I guess, Democratic ticket now officially?
Well, I mean, Biden wants more police, and Kamala is destroyed the Black, brown, and poor community where she was district attorney, from the mind-blowing corruption to the way that she targeted poor people of color through truancy laws. I mean, my Twitter is awkward rap, and you can go look for it. Like, when I found out that the worst possible choice was the one that Biden went with, I put out a thread of 20 shocking things that Kamala has done. I mean, yes, from a symbolic standpoint, a Black woman vice president is great. From a symbolic standpoint, I celebrated, along with every other leftist at the time, probably, and certainly the Black community, when Obama was elected. But these people are centrists, and the Democratic Party is not a leftist party.
Yeah, I gotta go on ahead and say this comment because it's been eating me up. When people talk about Kamala Harris as the first Black female candidate, I'm not going to go into trying to say her ethnicity is this or that or whatever. But what I will say is, she grew up with her mother raising her in a very strong Indian culture. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But what your cultures you're raised with shape your viewpoint, and I don't feel like she has that American Black experience.
Yeah.
And so she can have the bloodline, but if you don't have the experience, you don't see things quite the same way. And I feel that it's almost kind of like a bait and switch they're doing. They're throwing a black face out there. And I'm sorry, you guys can go at me for how I say this awkwardly, but it's like throwing a black face out there. And it's tricking us because it's somebody who doesn't even have our same shared experience. So she's going to be basically speaking for Black women who had a Black experience, and she doesn't have the Black experience. It's so frustrating to me.
I know that you also know, and you know better than I do, that if you're Black, part of your experience, if you're Black in America, part of your experience is shared in the way that, like, while I grew up experiencing a lot of anti-Semitism, and I, was one of the poorest people where I grew up, I can pass as a rich white guy anytime I want. It's easy to be me. Whereas she still went out in the world with Black skin and was a woman. So in a lot of ways, she shared your experience just by the nature of her appearance. But yes, I agree. I hear what you're saying. If she wasn't raised in a American Black household, she did not probably have the same conversations about race and dealing with police and how you're thought of, like the history of slavery and the civil rights movement and all of that. And
I put a lot of her Canadian upbringing. That makes a difference also, because I've lived in other countries also. And when you're in another country, it's different, and there are issues with racism, but it's not the same as here. And so I feel like even her growing up in Canada, even if she felt racism in Canada, it's not the same as a Black American experience. That's unique, know.
And you can just tell, like, she literally laughed when she was asked about putting parents in jail if their kids miss school. So, and Joe Biden, it was a segregationist. There's no
call him that.
Yeah, there's no debating. Jim Crow Joe is a great nickname. There is no debating that whether or not Kamala is a symbol, and it is that she is being used to try to attract more people of color and more women. Of course, if I were a person of color or a woman, I would always, if my only choices were Republican and Democrat, I would never vote Republican. As me, I would never vote Republican. There is nothing on earth that would cause me to vote Republican. And however, it's really important to just hold the Democrats responsible, hold them accountable, again, with this word, because they are supposed to be the party of the people, and they're not.
Exactly.
And so just having a blind eye to that and saying, well, they're Democrats, I'm not gonna say anything negative about them because I don't want more votes for Trump. It's just perpetuating this cycle, leading them further right. And so that's why I put way more importance on voting for a Cori Bush, for example. Black Lives Matter activist who is now in Congress. Someone like Jason Call, who ran in Washington, who not only endorsed the 10 demands for justice, but adopted it as his criminal justice plan.
Good.
There are progressive leaders. So we need sustained protest. We need demands like the 10 demands for justice on the desks of every congressperson, and that's how it works. We need to elect down ballot progressives. We need the general strike. We need Occupy Congress. All of these things all at the same time. So we hit them with this multi-pronged approach, and we keep them afraid. Because
that's what I'm talking about.
More than, while I don't disagree with you that having white allies can be beneficial, I think more important than that is having people who are scaring them. During the civil rights era, Martin Luther King, who in reality was anti-capitalist and way more revolutionary than people want to admit today, he was the safe choice. He was still assassinated, of course, but he was the safe choice. He would not have gotten...
I got assassinated, right?
Well, why? Why do you think?
Got assassinated when you start going off, when you start getting a little too real. They had made because you had Malcolm over here pushing hard against them, and they were like, well, Martin's only really asking for inclusion. Yeah. And so they were like, we can give them some inclusion as long as I don't have to give them better jobs, better wages, things like that. Exactly. And then after, I can't remember, I think it was 60, I'm not even gonna try on the dates, but after he got locked up and he released the famous quote, which a lot of us talk about now, where he believed that moderate rights are the biggest stumbling block that we're running into. And then if you listen to other speeches that he started talking about and where he was at when he was assassinated, he was there for a labor strike.
Yes.
I mean, with the sanitation workers.
Exactly.
You read it. The last speech, they didn't release it, but do you know what the title of his last speech was?
Not sure.
It's called "America's Going to Hell."
I didn't know that.
So what we have here is Malcolm X. To discredit him, a lot of people focus more on his early white devil rhetoric, and then they don't focus on towards the end when he started getting a lot more conciliatory after he went to Mecca and he was able to pray with Muslims of other faiths and interact with plenty of people of the Jewish faith also, and it was just a different understanding. And when he came back and he started speaking that different harmonizing message, people don't want to talk about that, and then they don't want to talk about how King was starting to get more radical.
Right.
And so I feel like the people who control most of the media, it's beneficial for them to say, no, we're fine with the just holding hands, and yes, we can all work together. But as far as trying to fix some redlining, and as far as trying to fix the policing, as far as trying to fix the prison system, or like I tell people, one thing that we need to really focus on for policing is the approach of police in general has to be shifted. We have been on basically the police are on a drug war approach that we've been going on since easily what I want to say. Well, we had the bootlegging in the 40s, and to push back against the bootlegging, the police forces built up to be able to deal with that. Now, once they got that stomped out, the heroin and all that stuff started moving in the 60s, and it turns into heroin, then cocaine, and then crack, and now we're dealing with opioids. And it's just turning into a different drug war to always funnel more people in through this criminal justice system. I mean, I guess that's how I see it. I could be too much tinfoil hat here.
Oh no, not at all. And you know, your comments about MLK and Malcolm were essentially what I was going to say, that, you know, they were so terrified of Malcolm X and the Black Panther Party that Martin was able to get some of the things that he was demanding passed. So you have people like me and demanding abolition. You have people protesting for 80 plus nights in a row in many cities across this country. You have a lot of my colleagues showing up on the front lawns of senators over this past weekend. You know, they're going to start to think, well, maybe we should pass some of these other things. Like maybe we should start to defund because we're so terrified of having no cops at all. So that's why I want to keep my foot on their neck, you know, so that some of this stuff starts passing today. And then when we see the progress and the positive results, it will open us up to full abolition. And so you're far from tinfoil. The reality is that, you know, you could just look at the fact that for many years, the sentence for crack cocaine was 100 times worse than the sentence for coke, for powder cocaine. And then like in the 2015 or something, they changed the law. It's still, after that, 20 times worse. Why do you think that is? Because there are certain people they want to put in prison and certain people they're putting them in prison for. You know, so that's why, you know, changing the way we police to me is not the solution, because right now, I think by now we have seen study after study has shown that a living wage, holistic health services and treatment, educational opportunities, and stable housing are all more successful in reducing crime than police or prisons. You know, and we've seen that all of these past efforts to reform this system that is doing what it's supposed to be doing has only, you know, as Angela Davis said, has only worked to strengthen it further. So what abolitionists are calling for is both, you know, a transformation of the techniques for addressing crime and of the underlying social and economic conditions that track children from poor communities, and especially those of color, you know, straight from school into the juvenile system and then on to prison. So, you know, going back to the 10 demands, you know, in addition to the independent investigation and holding them accountable, we want to start replacing cops and patrols with peacekeepers and wellness checks.
Which I was going to tell, sorry to interrupt. I know I'm bad at interrupting. I grew up in one of those families we always interrupt. So I was going to say, because
No.
you mentioned it, and I wanted to highlight on it. That's one of the big things that I really do like about the platform. Well, my favorite part is the independent inquiry part. That's one part which really caught my attention in there. And I was like, there, right there is one of the biggest chunks of the problem. And if you can deal with that, I feel like that starts streamlining a lot of the other things that are talking about in the 10.
Yeah, and not just the independent investigation, but what do we do when we find that they have broken the law? They need to also be held accountable, but not held accountable through carceral punishment, because we are working toward ending carceral punishment. So cops would be fired. They would never be allowed to hold a position of power like that again, and they would have to face reparative justice in the same way someone else would who committed a crime and harmed someone.
Well, kind of like drunk driving. How if you drunk drive and you have to do community service and you have to do a certain amount of counseling and
Yes.
fines and some of those things like that. I think that's a great idea. To as an alternative to carceral system.
Yep, exactly. So we as we're defunding and as we're holding cops accountable, we're introducing these new techniques for peacekeeping and intervention and prevention, education and treatment, mutual aid, mediation, and reparative justice. At the end of Angela Davis's book, Our Prisons Obsolete, she gives an amazing example of a family whose I think it was their children were killed, and they, instead of fighting to make sure that these murderers were incarcerated for life, they fought to keep them out of prison, and then ended up befriending them and going around the country speaking, and together they experienced this form of reparative justice where the victims were healed and the perpetrators, who in most cases have been victims themselves, are also healed. And together they started to, have positive influence on society. That kind of thing is never talked about, but the vast majority of victims actually prefer investments in education, jobs, and drug and mental health treatment over prisons and jail.
See, what you're talking about there is it's a little scary concept for people who are too trapped inside the mainframe.
Yes.
See, now you're talking about community. Now you're talking about looking at each other and figuring how we can help each other, how we can put aside things which are hard for us. I mean, I know I have one of those. Sadly, and I need to work on it, and I'm trying to work on my faith in getting there. But I'm a vengeful kind of person. I have the mindset: you do something harsh to me, I want to do it right back to you. But that mindset of love first and trying to reach these people is an effective thing. And especially, I consider myself a person of faith. I'm not sure about yourself, but I've been taught that love is the most powerful thing, and it's time to start more walking the walk of believing love is the most powerful thing, or not.
Right. Isn't it funny?
Look at you can either love or you can treat everybody like security. I mean, you could want all this money, build all these prisons to feel safe, or you can make sure that everybody has a sense of security so we all feel safe.
Right. And, it brings up two things to me. Like, one, it's funny that some of the most, strong-willed, tough on crime people are like evangelical Christians, like super self-proclaimed Christians couldn't be less about love, couldn't follow Jesus's teachings. It works when it works for them. Like, they're against abortion, but at the same time, they're not for helping the women or the children that are forced to exist, like to have the kids. And so, it's the kind of thing where for certain people, it works, the way they want it to work, how they want it to work, and for who they want it to work for.
I'll say quick personal question. You can say no comment if you don't feel like answering or not, but are you practicing faith Jewish?
Partially.
Okay. Well, good enough. those same evangelicals, they all talk about Jesus, 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 Jesus. And I guarantee you walk up to half of them and say Yahshua, they have no clue you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. So yes, they can claim they're religious and the Bible, and it's shown by your fruits of what you do. If you're out there, I don't care if you get a lot of money. That's fine. I don't care if you have a corporation, but how do you treat your people? How do you run your business? Do you always try to take advantage of people? That makes a difference. You can scream Christian to the high heavens, but if you're doing all these things, me being a person of faith says that shows that you're obviously telling me what you really are by your actions.
Yep. And, it brings up another question people have asked me, like, can you abolish prisons without abolishing capitalism? Because you mentioned corporations. I believe that you can. I am not a fan of huge corporations. I am obviously, it shouldn't surprise anyone that I'm for small business owners and for a humanist, more social democratic society where people work together. But if you want to be someone who prioritizes money, you want to be a capitalist, you want to own a corporation and just like all of them today, not pay taxes, you can still not invest in prisons. You can still not we could still require states and the Fed as until prisons are obsolete, until they don't exist, there's still no reason we have to have public-private partnerships so that corporations profit off of people being incarcerated. There's no reason why we need for-profit policing. There's no reason, why they should be working for slave wages. So I do believe it's possible to do all this even within a capitalist society.
I completely agree because even, I guess, politically, I consider myself a Marxist. But I realize it would almost be impossible to implement a Marxist political ideology as a party because it's more just a critique and a way of viewing things. So I've settled as far as even from the beginning of Dawn, we've always had forms of mercantile where we were servicing goods back and forth to each other. I don't have a problem with that at all. But I feel like we need to have that strong sense of community, and that if we're going to be a nation and we say we're all united as one, if we have a whole underclass of the community which is being left out, I don't feel that's very united and all as one. And so I support a lot of socialist policies for that means. Now I'm with an actual democratic socialist governing philosophy, not to be mistaken with a social democrat, which right now it's a whole lot of mixing that around. When I'm saying democratic socialist, I'm talking about actually socializing parts of the government entirety. So that's a whole nother discussion. That's just my viewpoint. But I believe that, yes, we do need that balance of figuring out how do we work a certain amount of capitalism, because our society is too ingrained and set up on it at this point. You would literally have to just destroy everything, start all over, everybody be dished out money, and it's impossible. So I feel like all you can do is in the meantime kind of work towards the proper means which help us all, and then kind of, I guess split the baby in the middle there,
Right.
I can't see the right-wing ideology at all. Even.
No. And tend for justice in so many ways. The humanist society that would be created in all of these forms of, community empowerment and community self-protection and community betterment would be creating these systems, where we're not policing ourselves, but we don't need police, and I honestly think that, as if you look through, unlike trying to topple capitalism, there are real substantive changes that can be implemented today to lead us down this path where at the very least we don't have a justice system that is entirely based on the concept of crime and punishment. You know, reparative justice suggests, obviously, in its name, repair. Crime and punishment is about revenge, and it doesn't work. It's been proven not to deter crime. So we just need to be honest. Like the concept of crime and punishment was a creation that can be replaced. You know, and like just to close it off, the last few parts of this are ending the war on drugs, because as we've talked about, the vast majority of the people in prison, the vast majority of those arrested are nonviolent offenders, those who are either arrested for possession or for committing a crime to feed their addiction. You know, and so in addition to decriminalizing drug use and drug addiction, legalizing marijuana, we need to invest in the communities most impacted by this decades-long war on drugs. And then finally, ending carceral punishment. There are so many things that we could do today, including, you know, for example, freeing everyone in jail, prison, you know, youth facilities and detention centers who are elderly, disabled, or immunocompromised, who are no threat, all nonviolent offenders, undocumented immigrants, you know, people who are literal criminals just because they're here, criminalized survivors, women typically, who have finally stood up to their abusers, and those who are being incarcerated simply on bail or parole violations. There are tons of people who are in prison because of their politics. You know, so freeing political prisoners, repealing 3 strikes laws and habitual offender laws, ending the school to prison pipeline and demilitarizing our schools so kids aren't trained from birth to end up as criminals. You know, ending pretrial detention and cutting funding to prosecutors' offices, abolishing ICE, and abolishing the death penalty. And then as we eliminate these carceral forms of punishment and all the carceral alternatives to incarceration that exist, we implement these measures for intervention, prevention, and education. And, you know, like I've said, like we will see immediate improvements to people's lives and to our safety. And that's the thing that people refuse to accept. But the research is there. A simple Google search will tell you that, you know, the worse the punishment is, the less effective it is. The death penalty costs more than life in prison. It doesn't deter crime. Life in prison costs, you know, putting someone in prison for a year costs more than putting them in college for a year and doesn't deter crime. So why are we doing this? Because we want to. So we need to take over. We need to demand that this is over. We're not going to do it anymore.
Yeah, I've tried to get this across to people, and I think that as long as we keep kind of being like that drop of water on that stone and just keep dropping and dropping and dropping, we'll start to kind of crave a little bit of a hole through it. But I feel like what you're doing is great work, and you definitely got my support, and I'll be behind you. And anytime that you definitely want to, you know, come on and talk about more of these issues and stuff, I felt like you really educated the audience today. Anything that you want to say before we get out of here? I know I see a couple of comments. I wanted to say, hey to Niall out there, and Vicky, Sherlock, Nick Marsh, and we got signs now. And anybody else who joined this live stream interview. Thank you guys for joining us. Anything you wanted to say? Anything you wanted to plug? Anything else that you have working on, Awkward?
Sure. You know, I'll just say a couple things. One, the group 10 Demands was kind of established organically in the creation of these 10 demands for justice. So our focus now is collecting all of the email addresses of every person essentially in a position of power at the state and federal level. And we will be sending these 10 demands to all of them. And we hope to find more of them adopting these, pushing for them in Congress. If you go to the site, tenforjustice.com, you'll see we have a lot of endorsements already, but we're hoping to grow that and see these things actually start to take shape. But meanwhile, we're also starting to work on 10 demands for education, 10 demands for healthcare, 10 demands for economic justice, environmental justice, electoral justice, because all of these things do intersect. I have, as I said, have been working on racial, social, and criminal justice for years. And so this is really has been my focus. But there are so many other issues we have in this society that directly interplay, electoral justice, for example, just the way that certain classes and races their votes are not counted. People are not allowed to vote or their votes disappear. The fact that the same politicians, who are getting donations from corporations, are giving to the police foundations, and those same corporations are profiting off of prison labor. All of these things are connected. Having free healthcare for everybody, having it be not so that rich people can go to Betty Ford, but poor people go to prison for the same addiction. That's healthcare. So education, demilitarizing education and ensuring that we have equal education across the country, so we all have the same opportunities. These things are all connected. So if you want to get involved, the contact information is on the site. There's also a 10 demands song and video that are coming out soon. It's being worked. The video is being worked on, so that'll be available soon on the website. So look out for that. And then we have a general strike starting on September 1st. So if you need information on that, check me out on Twitter. I'm always talking about that. That's probably the next big thing. Among the demands are racial and criminal justice. We can't expect change overnight, but we're also asking for a living wage, UBI, cancellation of rent. Before COVID, there were 40 million people who went to bed hungry every night. We already had a homeless epidemic, and now there's 30 million people who are in the process of being evicted and will be homeless as well. So where I believe that the more people who refuse to shop, those people who are in a position to refuse to work, we're trying to hit them where it hurts. Like, they care about their pockets. And if none of us go to work or shop, they'll see how much more they need us than we need them. So if you could participate in that, that would be great. If not, I understand, risking losing your job just puts you in that category of being the next homeless person. So no hard feelings if you can't. We are in a really tough situation in this country. But yeah, Awkward Rap on Twitter, AWKWORD, for anyone who wants to talk to me. My DMs are open. I always try to respond to people. I'm just trying to help. So thank you for your time, and I'll definitely come back.
Oh, thank you. Well, a good thing you said that, because I see Kelly in there. Kelly put love awkward. One of the things that I was going to say is I kind of have a habit of putting people on the spot right off the bat. I've already decided I love this conversation, and we need to pick up more on this conversation and expand on some of the other things that you started talking about. And so, audience, look for Awkward more on this platform, because I don't care what I have to do, but I want to make sure that I have him around more often so we can talk about some of these issues in more depth. So make sure to look for Awkward in the future. Make sure to catch myself, Niall Elcom, and Alyssa Vieira tonight for the Annihilation Cage. If you guys missed my showing earlier for my Young Black Forum, that should be replaying also. And I am in the process of trying to create a strong panel for lefties. I haven't figured out a time period that'll be open to all races, sects, creeds, whatever. But you need to be a hardcore lefty who is serious about the issues, and that's my only thing I asked. So if you guys are interested in that, please reach out to me. Hit me in my my DMs. You guys know I try to answer as much as I can. With that said, it has been Marcus Cage, other known as Young Morpheus, and my good man Awkward here, signing off for What I've Been Thinking. Thank you guys, and have a good weekend.